G'day guys, we've all seen that the Emperor's Children and the Creations of Bile have been making big splashes around the world, winning majors and GTs within the ITC circuit, and I'm here to add one more legion to the list of absolutely brutal Chaos Space Marine legions capable of going undefeated at a GT, ITC ranked event and absolutely crushing that first place position. So what I want to talk to you about today is my recent results from the Menza Masquerade GT here in Melbourne, where I took the Black Legion, went undefeated, and took down that first place overall. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this down into a 6-part video. In the first part, I'm going to break down my list. I'm going to talk about every unit, every warlord trait, every stratagem, and every decision that was made during that list writing process so that you can get a better understanding of what I ran at the event and how it worked. And then I'm going to do a separate video for each one of the rounds. So I'm going to talk about my opponent's list in detail. I'm going to talk about the decisions that were made, the secondaries that were selected, everything. So it's going to be a long mini series of sorts where there's going to be 6 different individual videos so that you can sort of digest it at your own pace. This is just going to be one of them. So if you happen to have not seen the other ones and you might have accidentally stumbled onto a part 2 or a part 3 of this series, make sure you go back to the start so that you can get a bit of an understanding of the list that I ran. And then the other videos will make a little bit more sense when you're looking at the games that we played and how it all sort of worked out on the tabletop. So with that being said, let's just jump straight into this video.
One for the Blood God.
Alrighty guys, thank you for tuning in, and now we're going into day 2 for the Menza Masquerade as part of my Menza Masquerade Black Legion undefeated GT win mini-series. So if you haven't watched the first one, make sure you head over and check out the first video in this series where I talk about my list in great detail. I talk about every unit, every warlord trait, and every stratagem. So once you've watched that, you can then jump back into this one and see how I went about using that list to verse Stuart Traynor and his Genestealer cult. Really, really interesting game. Stewie is a good mate of mine. We go way back. And so it was really good to get him on the tabletop. He's playing Genestealer cult, which is an absolutely insane army, really complex, really intricate and nuanced, and I was a bit nervous going into it because I've actually never played against Genestealer cults since like late 7th edition maybe. So it's been a long time, so I didn't really have a good grasp on what they do, but just like in the Knights matchup where I get a little bit confused about some of the things, the key here is asking very good questions. You need to make sure that you're asking the right questions at the right time, and then it doesn't matter what you know about their codex because you're asking good questions and they'll tell you what you need to know. So yeah, it was a really interesting game. Stewie's an absolute legend. So let's get stuck into his list. And then basically once we've talked about his list, we're going to go through the scoreboard. We're going to talk about the secondaries that he took, the secondaries that I took, how that all unfolded, what the scores look like. And then I'm going to do a bit of an overview of the game itself and talk about some of the different tricks that were played. This was a really tricky, really technical game, which is what you would expect from a Genestealer cult player and a player of Stewie's caliber, because he's an absolute legend of a character. He's a really, really strong player. So yeah, it was a really, really technical game. So I look forward to going into those details. But let's start off by looking at Stewie Traynor's list. So you'll have to forgive me if there's anything not quite right on here. As I said in the intro, I don't really know Genestealer cult, but I've done my best to transcribe his BCP list into something that'll fit on a screen for you guys to look at. So he was running a battalion detachment, he had the Myriad cult, he had a custom to Turmoil, Alien Fury, Industrial Affinity, and War Convoy. Don't ask me what any of those do, they do Genestealer cult things. He had a no organization slot unit, which was the Biophagus. Proficient Planning and Alchemist Supreme were his traits or upgrades or whatever. He had a HQ, which was an Acolyte Icon Ward, a HQ, which was a Primus, that was his actual warlord in the list. Then he had a whole bunch of Neophyte hybrids, so many models on the table here. So the first one had Perfect Ambush. He had a unit of 20 with 4 seismic cannons and the rest shotguns. Then he had a unit of 17 that were all shotguns. He had another unit of 20. This one had They Came From Below, also with 16 shotguns, 4 seismic. Then he had another unit of 20 with 16 shotguns, 4 seismic, but no upgrades. Then he had another unit of 20 with 16 shotguns, 4 seismic, and a final unit of 20 with the 16 seismic. This one had 4 flamers instead, and it had lying in wait as its proficient planning. Then in his elite slot, he had the Clamavus, its relic was Oppressor's Bane, he had the Kelamorph with the Wormtooth rounds, he had a Nexus with the Cranial Inlay, he had a Sanctus, which has a sniper rifle and had it from every angle proficient planning. And then he had 3 units of Atlan Jackals with blasting charges, 2 Wolf quads, 2 Atlan Incinerators, and more blasting charges. Still cult players out there, if you want to hit the comments up and let us know what the fuck any of that does, because to be honest, I was just like, when Stewie was talking, I was like, I don't know, what toughness are they? Toughness 3 dorks. Okay, cool, that's all I want to know. I can kill toughness 3 dorks. I don't need to know all of the fancy words for all the stuff that they do. It was just confusing me. So basically the way that his list was working from my understanding was that he had those 3 units of bikes that can pre-game move, and then he has 5 up feel no pain on one of them, and then he can put a random buff on a second one, and then basically he can do that each turn. Pick one to get the 5 up feel no pain, put a random buff on another one. So he buffs these biker units up really strong, and then he also has a guy who can resurrect them. So he resurrects D3 bikes at I think it's in the command phase. So if you kill one of those units down to not having enough bikes in it, he tanks wounds on the big quad bikes first. Then when there's only 1 or 2 left, he can resurrect D3. And when he does that, he can resurrect the big quad bikes. So these units, not only are they really tough to punch through, but when if you don't get the job done, they'll resurrect models. So really, really strong list. And he also has a whole bunch of 2 damage shots. He does a whole bunch of really powerful, massive amounts of dice, just buckets and buckets and buckets of dice. So that was his sort of game plan, is to flood the board with objective secured models and then flood the dice tray with dice that he's rolling to destroy all of my stuff. So it was a really interesting game. I noticed that he had a lot of characters, so that made it for an interesting sort of secondary game, because one of the things Chaos Space Marines struggle with is secondaries, but he presented a few really easy, in my opinion, to achieve secondaries, which I think teed up the rest of the game and the way the results were going to come out. So let's have a quick look at the results, and then we'll go through the specifics of what happened during the game. All right, so once again, I'm just going off memory from these, so I know that the score was a 93-point win to me and a 53-point loss to Stewie. However, I lost our mission sheet, so I can't remember specifically what scores we got for what, but I know that that was the total outcome. So from memory, I think I got 29 primary and then 12 of the sub-primary. We played Data Scry Salvage, which was the one where you have to do the action on your home objective and then score 1 primary point for each objective in the middle of the board that you hold, and there's the 4 objectives along that area. For secondaries, I took Assassinate, which I was able to get 15. I killed all of his characters by the end of the game. I took Warp Ritual, which was a risky play. I was a little worried that if he went first, he would screen me out of the center of the table. And I tossed up with the idea of that or Banners, thinking that if I take Banners and table him, well then late game, I'll be able to just raise a bunch of Banners. But I ended up going with Warp Ritual because I thought the same logic applies here. If I table him, I'll be able to do a bunch of Warp Ritual in later turns as well. So ultimately it was the same sort of thing, and I went with Warp Ritual because it's a little bit less interactive on his part, given that he has no Psychers. And then last, I took the obvious one, which is no Prisoners, because he has like 200 and something models on the table. It's very easy to score high on there. And then he got 0 primary all game. So I remember that distinctly because that's something that's very rare, especially in an army that has so many objective secured models. He did get 5 points for the sub-primary because he was able to hold a bunch of those central objectives and complete his home base action. I think for this mission, it was one of those ones where you have to hold 2 objectives to score 4 points on your primary. And I was able to consistently push him off the middle, and he was only holding his backfield, which meant he scored no primary all game. For secondaries, he took Brood Swarm, scored 15 points, took Ambush, scored 15 points, and took Retrieve Nephilim Data, which he scored 8. Now, Brood Swarm, I believe that's the one where he has to have more models in either his deployment, No Man's Land, my deployment, or on the table, and if he scores all of those, he gets 5 points, which was really easy for him to get massive on. Ambush was something like kill something with a unit that is got a crossfire token on it, I think it was. And then we all know Retrieve Nephilim Data, pretty straightforward. So yeah, that's our scores. So it was a 93 to a 53 point win for me. So yeah, really, really interesting game. There was a few moments in this game where there were some really interesting plays that I want to talk about because it was quite spicy. So basically he deployed everything out of line of sight, and then he went first. So he basically pre-game moved. Actually, no, I went first. I apologize. He had a pre-game move. That's why I thought he went first. So he deployed everything out of line of sight. We rolled to see who goes first. I won the roll. So he pre-game moved one of his units of bikes up into the center of the table, but out of line of sight to where my Terminators were. And then he had these other 2 units of bikes on the backfield, and pretty much everything else was in ambush blips, all up in deep strike, more or less. And then basically what I did in my first turn is I used my Veilbreaker Plate first turn, which is something I traditionally don't do with this list, as you would have heard in my intro in the first part of this series, but I decided to do it in this one, and I basically got line of sight on that unit that advanced up, pre-game moved, blasted it. It survived with, I think, 2 bikes, and then I charged another unit that was behind a ruin, and using the Master of Possessions to kill one of the Terminators in the Psychic phase, resurrect it closer, was able to get a 5-inch charge, which I rolled a 5 exactly, which was actually interesting because it meant that only a couple of Terminators were going to get to fight. So I had a really interesting conundrum where it was like, do I just accept the 5 inches and know that I made it in, I'm not going to kill the unit, but at least I made it there? Or do I go for the kill, re-roll it, hoping to get like a 6 or a 7 or an 8 and get more models in, but risk potentially failing and then being in a lot of trouble? And I decided at this stage I was going to risk it for the biscuit because I really wanted to kill both of these units. So I re-rolled it and I rolled like an 11, which meant my whole Terminator unit went in and obliterated that unit. So basically by the end of the first turn, I completely obliterated one unit, crippled the other, and I had my Terminators sitting on 2 of those objectives along that central line. Meanwhile, I moved Abaddon and the Decimators over onto the other 2 objectives, with my Cultists, my Raptors, my Rhino, my Legionnaires, all of those elements, trying to create screens behind me so that he couldn't deep strike down in behind me, which is really hard to do when you're versing Genestealer Cult, given that they have a 3-inch deep strike. So you've got to create 6-inch brackets, essentially, 6-inch lines, which is really, really hard to do. So basically, that was my turn 1 plan, and then in his turn 1, he brought in some of his army along one of the flanks. I'm trying to remember the specifics of how it worked, but basically he brought some stuff along one of the flanks and killed my Raptors, and that was about it. And then he pinned my Rhino. So maybe he did go first. Sorry, I'm just trying to remember. Maybe he did go first because he was able to drop a whole bunch of stuff in his, in that turn. So he must have gone first and done nothing. And then in my first turn, I've done this. And then in his second turn, he's brought in some reinforcements. That must have been how it worked. Because he wrapped my Rhino, and with these units of 20 models, he was able to actually wrap the Rhino in such a way that the Legionnaires couldn't disembark, which was a really smart play on his part. And then he took a bunch of objectives off me where Abaddon was, but Abaddon just went in and just shredded anything that went near him. One of the really interesting plays was I had that unit of Terminators strung out across 2 objectives, and I had the Sorcerer nearby in the center of the table doing his Warp Ritual. And what Stewie did is he dropped a unit of Neophytes so that it was 8 inches away from my Terminators in an arc like that, 8 inches away, and then the Sorcerer was down here. And then what he did is he charged the Sorcerer, and the plan was that he could then move the arc down with the charge move and the consolidates and the pile-ins so that he could get onto my objectives and take them off my Terminators without actually engaging the Terminators in combat and without ending the starting the fight phase within 3 inches. So I couldn't consolidate or anything like that. I couldn't heroically intervene, and he was going to basically use the charge move from that Sorcerer to swing around. And he thought this was a big, brilliant, billion IQ play, and it really was, except for one thing, and that is that his plan was to put, I had 3 Terminators on this objective, 3 on that one, and then a couple bridging the gap. And my Terminators were objective secured. He was planning to put just like 5 on each, and then he'd take those objectives off me. What he didn't realize is that if he had done that in my command phase, I could have just spent 1 CP to turn those Terminators into red Corsairs for a turn, and then they would count as double models, which would mean that I would have had more models on those objectives than him, and I would have taken them off him anyway. Unfortunately for Stewie, he failed the charge anyway, so he didn't get to do his trick, and then I didn't get to show him my counter to his trick. But it was still a very interesting trick, and it's something that's worth noting. If there's somebody on an objective, like say it's an Abaddon, and you don't want to get within heroic range, but you want to get on the objective, what you can do is charge a nearby unit that you're not scared of, and then use your end of fight consolidate to get onto the objective. And that'll allow you to take it off Abaddon whilst denying him the ability to heroically intervene. Same goes for these Chaos Terminators that can heroically intervene with Black Legion strats or Slaneshi strats. If you go, cool, I'm actually just going to stay outside of his range until the end of the fight phase with my consolidate move, then they can't stop you. So it's a really smart play by Stewie, and it shows that he's definitely thinking outside the box. I think ultimately the reason that Stewie lost this game is his overall strategy was wrong. His approach to the game. So, he did really good tactics, and I differentiate tactics and strategy with tactics are things like this charge move that I'm talking about. It's a specific move of a specific unit or a specific combination of abilities to do a specific thing. That's what a tactic is. Whereas a strategy is the decisions that you make before the game. The decisions when you go, okay, how am I approaching this game? What's my overall plan for the game, right? And Stewie's overall plan seemed to be to ignore the Terminators. And that, I think, is what cost him the game. He was doing things like attempting to move block the Terminators, so he'd put a screen of those neophytes in front of the Terminators so that the Terminators couldn't move to his backfield and do damage over there. But then all I would do is spend a command point to make them 30-inch range, shoot the thing on the other side of the table, and then charge the thing that was supposedly blocking me. It was like, you just fed me an extra unit. Realistically, that didn't help. He should have, in my opinion, and if you go up against the Black Legion, I would advise doing whatever you can to fucking kill those goddamn Terminators. Because if you leave them alive, you just can't leave them alive. It's not an option. Because they do so much damage, they're so fast, the fact that they can teleport around, they can only do it once, but sometimes that's all you need, is that one time when they drop into your backfield after they've been shooting at you for a while. You can't just let them do whatever they want to do, because they just win games. They just win games on their own. And Stewie was concerned that even if he went full ham, he wasn't going to kill the Terminators. But I would argue that that was his only option. Sometimes your only option is a bad option, but you've just got to take of the options available, take the least bad one. It can still be bad, but you have to do it. And I think if he had timed it and waited for maybe that turn where Illusory Supplication fails, maybe he waits for the turn when Delightful Agonies fails or Pact of Flesh fails or something like that, so that he's able to do a little bit more damage. So maybe he just doesn't drop on turn 2. Maybe he just sits back out of line of sight, waits for me to fail a power, and then the turn I fail, he's like, okay, now that you failed that power, you are fucked. And that's when he drops in. I think that's how he should have approached the game. Instead, what he was trying to do was eliminate all of my other elements. Try to eliminate the cultists, try to eliminate the legionnaires so that I couldn't score things. But it's like, well, my scoring wasn't really predicated on them. I was scoring with the Terminators. I was scoring with Abaddon. I was killing you. All I had to do was kill characters, kill bodies, and cast psychic powers. So realistically, the cultists aren't helping me do any of that. So you can kill them. I don't care. Have them. You just have them. I think he should have gone hard on the Sorcerer, hard on the Master of Possession to try to kill those, and then try to cripple that Terminator unit, because every one of those Terminators that dies is 4 shots rerolling hits and wounds that are not coming out and hitting into those, those bodies. And if he can stop me from tabling him, that means he does have the scoring elements to get those primary points and to sort of push up and try to achieve that score. So it was a tough game for him, I'll give him that. I'll admit that it's a matchup that I wouldn't want to play if I was in his shoes. I don't think his list has the damage capacity to actually cripple the Terminators and that's something that he needs to do. But I still think that his overall strategy and his approach to the game was probably slightly off. But I want to know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments below. If you're a Genestealer cult player, let me know what you think of Stewie's list. And let me know if you think Stewie misplayed it, or if you think Stewie was able to beat me if he focused on Terminators, or if you think it was the right move to ignore the Terminators. Let me know what you would have done. Let me know what you think about the decisions that I made during the game as well, if you thought there was anything interesting there. Thanks again for tuning in. I want to also do a quick shout out and a thank you to all of those who support me on Patreon. We have an amazing community over there. We have a unique Discord where we have, great conversations. I do one-on-one coaching and strategy advice. I do tactics stuff over there, exclusive for my Patreons. And I also do exclusive Patreon blog for the Blood God dice, is what I'm trying to say. Sorry, I had a bit of a brain fart there. But yeah, we do dice over there. We do t-shirts. We do objective markers, all kinds of stuff. There's great ways that you can show your support for the channel, which is going to help me continue to grow, help me to buy better equipment, and work on improving the channel overall. So your support is very much appreciated. And with that being said, I'm going to get into the next one. So make sure you tune in, check that out, and make sure you check out all the videos in this series if you want to learn a little bit more about how Black Legion can go undefeated at a GT. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I'll see you in the next one.
Look for the Blood God.
The Warhammer community suffers from some of the most prohibitively expensive essentials in the world, especially Australian content creators. Every single day, Dean wants to create content, but he can't. Suffering from old, worn-out brushes, expensive model kits, and costly software and equipment he can't endure much longer. Just look at this dirty paint water. Would you drink this? Would you let your child? Even a small monthly donation can help provide Dean with clean paint water, basic tools for survival, and access to life-saving information and education. So please, follow the links in the description below and find out how you can sponsor a mad cunt like Dean today and end the suffering. Suffering that is cruel, unsustainable, and your fault.
Do your objective markers ever get lost behind terrain or other models and become difficult to see? Do they ever get bumped and accidentally moved during a game? And do they ever spark arguments about distances? Well, not anymore. Introducing the blog for the Blood God, not even remotely patented neoprene objective markers. Made from the same material as astronaut suits, or maybe military equipment, or probably neither of those things, this 2mm thick neoprene synthetic rubber is tear resistant, water resistant, and is designed to last. But that's not all. The blog for the Blood God, not even remotely patented neoprene objective markers come in a variety of different designs and styles to suit any faction represented in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. These objective markers are a perfect gift for yourself or a friend, and are a perfect way to flex and show your opponent that not only are you a smarter, cooler, and better 40k player than them, but you also have more disposable income than they do. For the low price of $25, you'll get not one, not two, but 6 neoprene objective markers, perfectly designed for 9th edition Warhammer 40k. But wait, there's more. For a limited time only, people who sign up on Patreon to support Blog for the Blood God as a Skull Champion tier $5 per month member will gain access to a custom design service where I will design a unique logo to support their gaming club, like the one I did to the left here for the Potato Farmers local gaming club here in Melbourne. Follow the links in the description of this video to pick up your set today.